Gatekeeper, open the portals between the gods and mortals. Power freely flows as our magic grows.
Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jonathan.
And you're listening to Part the Mist,
a podcast by a couple of ADF druids here in Portland, Oregon.
So, Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay, actually. I just got out of work, been driving a bus for a long while, and I'm ready to get done with the show and then go to bed.
The wheels of your brain, huh?
Yeah, they go round and round, round and round, round and round.
Yep, I hear that. Yeah, not really a whole lot of nothing new to report this month, really. Just kind of plugging forward. We had a really good, successful spring equinox ritual.
Yes, that was actually quite good.
Yeah.
It changed hands to two other leaders. It was supposed to be somebody else, but life happened, and so now we had two other people do it. Two non-Hellenic people lead the rite, and it was quite fantastic.
It really was. We did a beautiful passion play about the return of Corey.
Yes, yes. If you want to see those pictures, you can go ahead and check out our Facebook fan page, the Columbia ADF, the Columbia Grove ADF fan page, and there's a bunch of pictures and descriptions of that as well.
Yeah, or if you're not a Facebooker, you can check out our website too, columbiaadf.org.
We have a pretty jam-packed show today, actually.
Yeah, so I got the opportunity to talk with a pretty big-name ADF writer, and let me see if I can get his nom de plume correct. It's so you'll know him as Ceisiwr Serith. He's written the Book of Pagan Prayers. He's written The Pagan Family. And he's written a book about the Proto-Indo-European culture, which is actually the only book on that hearth culture that we have on the Proto-Indo-European hearth culture for the Dedicant Path reading list.
I think the book is called Deeper Ancestors.
Yes, that sounds right, and we do talk about it during the interview as well. But yeah, so I have to apologize. It's a little bit awkward at the start. I'm sure Jonathan will help edit out some of the awkwardness, but it's as I really get into talking with so David is actually what he prefers to be called. But as I kind of get into the swing of my conversation and kind of get to know David a little bit better, the conversation picks up a lot more, and he really is just a fascinating person to talk with. And we actually ended up carrying on our conversation for quite a while after the interview too. So just speaking on my own behalf, I think I'd like to have him on again and pick his brain some more, because my gosh, that is one intelligent man.
Well, I've listened to it, and it is quite fantastic, Aaron. No worries about it. I did my little magic and fixed a little bit of it.
Wonderful. Jonathan, you are amazing.
We also have Melissa Hill went to ConVocation, and she was kind enough to send us in her report of the convention, so you'll be able to hear that. We also have from the archives, from Reverend Kirk Thomas, reading Brigid and the Cailleach article from Oak Leaves. Oh, hey, Aaron.
Yes?
We might be having a new segment to the show coming shortly.
That's right. We've talked with one of the ADFers, and we're working on getting a solitary druid segment running for our listeners who may not be associated with a grove.
Yeah, that might be a regular segment too. So be on the lookout for that. There will be announcements when that is released. Hopefully in our next month's podcast.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully get you some updates too through the Facebook page, which I need to be better at staying on top of. And that's pretty much.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add. So go ahead and sit back and enjoy the interview.
So, welcome listeners to another episode of Part the Mist. I am here today with a longtime member of ADF. It's a name you all have probably, if within paganism, have seen a few times. But if you're anything like me, you have no idea how to pronounce it, so I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I go by the name Ceisiwr Serith when I write. My legal name is actually David, and I'm trying to reclaim that. So perhaps we could go by that today.
Absolutely. I was just going to ask, actually, if it was okay if I refer to you as David today.
Sure. Most people in the pagan community who know me just call me Kai, because it's a lot easier than Ceisiwr. But like I said, I'm trying to go by David more and more.
And I have been, I have seen some posts floating around on Facebook. I remember there was a thread quite a while back talking about pagan names and your preference to go back to just being known as David. Right.
It occurred to me at one point that almost all of my friends were in the pagan community, so almost nobody was calling me by my first name, and I kind of missed it.
I can understand that. So, so the question I always like to start out my interviews with, what drew you to paganism?
It kind of started when I was pretty little, and I like maybe second or third grade, and I started reading books on Greek myths. But then that just sort of sat around as a kind of an academic interest, if you can call something a fourth grader is reading an academic interest. But it really got started in high school as a fraud. A friend and I had a good friend, and both of us had come to this school recently, and this was in a small town where everybody had gone to school with each other since kindergarten. So we were the new kids, and we were kind of looking for an identity. And we were building this structure up on a hill behind his house, which had a circle and a triangle and a pentagram and fire. Don't ask why. But anyways, I was doing it one day, and when I'd been a little younger, my brother and sister had been reading books on Wicca, What Witches Do and Mastering Witchcraft, and so I'd read them too. So we're building this thing, and I said to myself, this looks a lot like a witch thing. We should start a coven. And my friend said, okay. So we were going to start this coven basically just to become the school witches, to have some sort of identity. So I started doing a lot of research on it, because that's what I do, and writing rituals on it, because I do that too. And I got hooked. And I decided I liked it, and I stayed in Wicca for a fair number of years, and then switched over to ADF. And I've got to remember, this was back in the mid-'70s I was doing this, so the books available were very few, and I was trying to just figure everything out based on it, and it was a whole different view of neo-paganism then.
What inspired, or what influenced then the transition over to ADF?
Well, like I said, I'd like to do a lot of research, and one of the things about Wicca that had appealed to me was the whole ancient part. This was an ancient mystery cult. And the more I studied, more I realized, no, it wasn't. And so now I was falling back on my roots of getting into mythology, and I started studying that. Actually, part of it was instigated by a girlfriend I had at the time who knowing that I knew about mythology, asked me about Rhiannon from the Fleetwood Mac song. And I didn't really know anything about her, so I went out and I bought the Mabinogi, and I bought Princess McKenna's book, Celtic Mythology, fantastic book, and I started researching the Celts, and that got me into the Celts. And the more I got into that sort of stuff, the more I realized that I preferred the Reconstructionist side to the Wicca side. Still have fond feelings towards Wicca, no problem with it, it's just not ancient, and I want ancient.
Okay, so I'm going to be totally honest here. I think one of your books might have been the first bit of literature I had seen from an ADF member far before I even knew what ADF was.
What book was that?
And that was the Book of Pagan Prayers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I picked that up when I was starting to get into paganism and kind of looking for a way of just working my existing spirituality into my new pagan identity, and there's some absolutely beautiful things in there.
Thanks. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Oh, good. So tell us a little bit about your writing. What inspired you to start writing about paganism to begin with?
Well, I was talking with a friend of mine one day about the stuff that we did as a family, the various religious things we did as a family. And she said, you could write a book. And I went, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And a few days later, I was at a rehearsal for a chorus I was in, and the conductor was working with one of the other voices, and I jotted out an outline, looked, and I said, damn, I could write a book. So I did. And that's how I started writing. I realized that I had enough information and that I could write a book based on it. So I wrote a book.
And was that the Pagan Family?
That was the Pagan Family, yep. And then I had this idea for a 3-part series. I'd done a book on practicing paganism as a family, and I wanted to do one on practicing in a small group, kind of like a coven, although I would end up not calling it a coven, and also one on doing it individually. And the small group one became my book, Back to the Beginnings, which you can get through Lulu Press or through me. And the individual one became Book of Pagan Prayer.
Okay.
They never really became part of a series per se, but that was the concept.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually started writing Book of Pagan Prayer a long time ago, early 80s maybe, mid-80s. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I would just write a few more prayers and throw them in and work on the beginning section, the intro part about prayer in general, and then put it away for months and just sort of let it gel for a bit. And then Pagan Family went out of print, and I got the rights back, so I wrote a second edition, which is actually on my website. The whole thing is on there for free. And I sent it to Wiser, and the second edition to Wiser. And then I waited and waited and waited, and they didn't didn't tell me anything. So I wrote them a very nice letter saying, gee, I submitted this. Gee, I hope it didn't get lost in the mail, which is basically get off your duff and do something in a very polite way. And I got a letter back from them, and there'd been a merger, basically. Red Wheel had bought Wiser. And in the merger, things had gotten a little confused, and things had fallen through the holes, and one of the things that fell through a hole was my book. And they'd found it again from the hole and read it through and didn't want to publish it, but they were interested wanted to know if I was interested in writing a book about prayer, mm-hmm. which I'd been working on for 20 years. So I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. And they said, when you can give me some chapters, 90 days. So I sent them to them in 90 days. And then they said, great, when you can have the whole book, 90 days. It was easy to do this because the book was half written. Uh-huh. So I just sort of fell into it. It was very lucky. I actually got asked to write the book. The book I don't writing.
Well, can you write us this book? Well, gee, let me see. It might be difficult.
I know. I'll give it a try. Yeah. So I remember sitting in. I was taking a course in German and a course in French at a local college, and the one was in the morning, one was in the afternoon. So in between, I had my lunch, and then I'd go find an empty classroom, and I'd sit there and I would just write a couple dozen prayers. Mm-hmm. I would just say, okay, what deities haven't I written for? What purposes don't I have enough for? That sort of a thing, and just knock off a couple dozen prayers each day until I had enough.
That's amazing. I sometimes struggle to knock out a single prayer in a day.
I'll go through periods where I don't write very many. The last couple of weeks I haven't written very many at all, but that's mainly because I've written so many to the same gods or mm-hmm. gods from the same cultures, and I'm trying to make sure that I include deities from other cultures. And so I sat down with a book on Baltic paganism today, and went through and looked at the gods there and their descriptions, and I wrote 16 prayers to Baltic gods. So I go in fits and starts.
Speaking of deities from other religions, I see here on your website that you have some interest in a Thelemic deity.
Thelemic, yeah. Aleister Crowley.
Uh-huh. Being someone who didn't really study a whole lot of Crowley, can you, or read a whole lot about Crowley, can you expand on that for us?
Well, the three major divine figures in Crowley's system are Nuit, Hadit, and Rahu Kuit. The Nuit is the star goddess, who's is the border which is found nowhere. And Hadit is the god figure, who is the center which is found everywhere. And Rahu Kuit is the crowned and conquering child who proceeds from them and in some sense reconciles them. I've got a fairly strong attachment to Nuit, so I've written some things for her. I studied the system pretty intently in college. I haven't worked with it in quite a while, but still have lots of books on it. It's an interesting system in and of itself. Some great rituals, just a lot of depth to it. And for people who are Wiccans, if you want to know the history of Wicca, you've got to study it. About half of actually more like 2/3 of the Charge of the Goddess comes from it. And there are a bunch of other little tidbits here and there that are taken from it.
Oh, very neat. So, can you tell us a little bit about the Pagan family?
Well, that was just a book based on what we did as a family, like celebrating moon cycles, celebrating seasons of the year, a little bit about teaching kids their weddings, funerals, just like how to practice paganism as a family. It was written from a sort of generic paganism, sort of Wiccan sort of way. It wasn't as widespread as I would do it today. In fact, my second edition, I include a lot more other traditions. I know there's some Norse in there, for instance. Mm-hmm. Examples of rituals. For each occasion, I like to provide at least 2 rituals, maybe 3 if possible. Mm-hmm. So that's what's in that. It's a good book for people who are raising kids and want to raise them pagan and just celebrate things as a family, and even people who aren't. There's some fairly simple rituals in there for moon festivals and seasonal festivals. So it could be useful to just about anybody. Like I said, it's on my website. It's free. If you want to just anybody wants to have a look at it and see if they find it useful, that'd be great.
And I'm looking at that website now for our listeners, and it is www.Ceisiwr Serith.
Ceisiwr Serith.
CeisiwrSerith.com.
Right, it's just the name I published under.
And we will have the link up in the show notes.
Good. There's a lot of stuff on the site. I keep throwing things up there. It's gotten rather big.
Yeah. Part of the reason why I keep going quiet here is because I'm actually kind of checking out the website as we talk for ideas, and there's a lot to go through. Much like Isaac Bonowitz's website, there's a lot of links and a lot of sublinks to go through, but do not be intimidated. It's so far everything that I'm seeing is just very well written, and definitely grabbing the attention.
I try.
So, and speaking of which, one of the things that I'm seeing here is Mithraism.
Yep.
And I know that Jonathan seeing something here about a cult of the Roman Empire. I know Jonathan's thing is not the Roman Empire, but it's pre-Empire, but I'm sure that he would want me to ask for you to expand on that some.
Okay, well, I told you earlier I read a lot of Greek mythology when I was a kid, and I also read a lot of Roman mythology. And I was in high school, and I read Mary Stewart's book, The Crystal Cave, and Mithras shows up in it. And I was shocked that here was a Roman god I'd never heard of. It just really annoyed me. So we lived just down the street from St. Anselm's College. So I went up to their library and started researching on Mithraism. And through the years, I've just sort of dabbled in it. I've got a pretty good collection of books and articles on the subject, and just kind of dabbled in it because I want to keep up with the field. It's a fascinating little religion. It was the worship took place in these underground caves, usually artificial, like underground, like cellars almost. And because of that, when Christianity took over, the worshippers would generally just cover them up, wall them up. So when they've been discovered, they're in almost perfect condition. Statues are in place, like everything is exactly the way it was when the Mithras were worshiping there. But because it's a mystery religion, we have almost nothing written down about it. So it'd be sort of like finding 50 churches. Now tell me about Christianity. And that's the way it works out. Explain Christianity to be based on the architecture and the images in 50 churches. So it's fun. There's enough evidence to argue about forever, but not really enough evidence to come to any final conclusions. Mm-hmm. So it's a great field to get into. But Mithras was he comes from a Iranian god, a Zoroastrian god, but the Roman version of him is only slightly related to it. But all you have from that is the way he's dressed and his name. He's not at all in some ancient sort of god. It's a lot like Wicca. Some small group probably got together and took a whole bunch of traditions from some astrology, some Zoroastrianism, who knows what else, mixed them all together and came up with this religion, and started this group that practiced initiations in a small group, just like Wicca did, and it's just a fascinating field to me. One of the really important things about it is that a lot of people think that Christianity borrowed a lot of things from it, and you'll see that all over the place, and it's just flat out wrong. The most important reason for which is that we don't have any evidence for it until the end of the 1st century. So it actually post-dated Christianity. It's one of the things, people have this attitude that if it's pagan, it must be pre-Christian.
Right.
But there were a lot of things in paganism that didn't come about till after Christianity. And Mithraism is one of those things that didn't exist till then. My personal theory is that it was a mixture of religious ideas from the Eastern Mediterranean, including Gnosticism, and just made into a mystery cult. Mm-hmm. So on my website, I've got 2 articles. One is on what Mithraism is, and one is on what Mithraism isn't. And on the isn't one, I address the question of influences on Christianity. You'll see things like Mithras was born on December 25th, accompanied by shepherds with 12 followers, and none of that's true. Uh-huh. So I talk about that. So that's one of my hobbies, you might say, my academic hobbies.
And speaking of academic hobbies, it looks like you have also written your own language and culture, religion. Yeah. I was writing, when I first started writing The Pagan Family, I thought I'd also start writing a novel and just see how the 2 of them went, and go with the one that was going the best. And the Pagan Family went a lot better. I discovered I was very bad at writing believable characters. But it was a fantasy, and I've come from the old-fashioned Tolkien point of view, where you want an entire culture if you're going to have a fantasy. So I had to make up a history and a language and a religion and what people eat and how they dressed and what their architecture was and so on. Mm-hmm. And it became fun on its own, just inventing the culture. And just like with the prayer book, over the years, every now and then I pick it up and knock off a few more pages. It's never going to see print, but it's just fun to work out these ideas and to try to figure out more about. It's helped me figure out more about how people are. To have to write believable characters, you have to understand people better, and so writing the fiction has helped with that. But I just put it on there because why not?
I put a lot of work into this, show it off to somebody. Some people are very interested in made-up languages. There are entire groups based on it. There are a lot of YouTube videos on it. So I figured someone might find that interesting.
I mean, I personally think it's really cool. I haven't had a chance to dig into your website here, into the links on your website here yet, but being a fan of Tolkien myself, like that's one of the things that I find fascinating with a really good fantasy book is the language and the culture that people have created, and as a aspiring writer myself, that's the part that I really struggle with. I'm the opposite. I'm good with characters, not so good with culture.
Yeah, well, it wasn't all completely original. I based the deities about half and half on Proto-Indo-European deities, and then made up ones. And the language, most of the vocabulary comes from Proto-Indo-European, but the grammar isn't Indo-European at all. That was part of the conceit of the whole thing, that some Indo-Europeans came into an area and the languages mixed together, and you ended up with this language, and the cultures mixed. You ended up with this culture. So a lot of it stuff I was basing on other things, but the result is mine, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tolkien's wasn't completely original either. That his was so heavily based on the Norse.
Right, that's true, and Finnish as well. He was heavily influenced by the Finns.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Speaking of the Proto-Indo-European, that was the question that Jonathan wanted to make sure that I asked. Is have you talk with us some about that, because we haven't actually had a Proto-Indo-European conversation really going on the podcast yet.
Yeah, well, it's not like it's found everywhere, is it?
No.
It's a little obscure. It's one of my geeky interests.
I hadn't heard of it before I came to ADF. I
kind of got involved in it because of this. In fact, I definitely got involved in it because of the culture of that I was making up, because that got me into the language, the roots, and then from that I started getting into the culture. So I actually got into Proto-Indo-European via that, and I told you earlier that I liked ancient stuff, and Wicca wasn't so ancient, but I developed a form of Wicca based heavily on Indo-European things, and that's the kind that you'll find in Back to the Beginnings. And there are some excerpts from that on my website as well. And that got me really researching the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So those were both going on at the same time. So that's how I got involved in that particular geeky thing. I was lucky that I lived near Boston, and there are some really good libraries in Boston, college libraries. Oh, so I was able to find some really good sources. One of them even had the Journal of Indo-European Studies in it. So that was a real helpful thing.
I bet. So can you tell us some about give us some details about the Proto-Indo-European? Okay,
well, Indo-European and Proto-Indo-European are both at their root linguistic terms. Most of the languages starting in Iceland and working your way east over to India are all related. There are some Basque, Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian that aren't related, but all these other ones are. So that's why it's called Indo-European, from India and Europe. And you could think of them as cousins. And if they're cousins, then there has to be a grandfather. And Proto-Indo-European is the grandfather. So if you trace all these languages back, you end up with one language that they all descended from. And that one language is Proto-Indo-European. And if languages kind of carry cultures. They're not necessarily linked with them. Like British culture and American culture and Australian culture are quite different. Oh, yeah. But in general, you see similarities. So if you've got one group that speaks a language, and of course in those days it would have been a fairly small group, they've got to have a culture too, or they would be a group. So you have to ask yourself, well, if you're like me, you have to ask yourself, what was their culture? And specifically, what was their religion? So you start out by looking at the language that you've recreated, and you find that they've got a word for God, Deus. and there's a word meaning to pour libation, Q. And so you can tell some things about their religion based on the words you reconstructed. But you can also look at the descendant cultures and do this. To recreate the language, you look at all these descendant languages and compare them and try to figure out what these different words, how they're related, what they could have come from. And so you trace them back and back until you figure out what the original version was. And you can try doing that with the culture as well. So like you look at a particular deity you find in 5 different cultures that are very similar, especially if it has a similar name, a name that comes from the same root. Jupiter, Zeus Pater, Diaus Pitar, and so the Norse Tiwaz comes from the same root as well, and there are some other ones in there, Diavos et Dievos in Lithuanian. The names can all be traced back to one name, Deus Pater, the Shining Sky Father. So we actually have a name of a deity there for sure. And then we can look at what Jupiter and Zeus and Dievos and Deus Pater all have in common and see what kind of god Deus Pater was. And you keep doing this sort of combining and comparison, and eventually you can reconstruct a lot about the culture. Not everything, but a fair amount about it. And so I read a lot of people who have done that, and I also do some myself too. I don't do any linguistic reconstruction. I call that practicing etymology without a license, and I just do not do that. That's way out. I've taken one course in historical linguistics, and that's all my training in that. So I don't do any of that, but I do some cultural reconstruction, and it's just fascinating stuff. There's a familiarity to it. You just, because it's at the root of so much of what we do, people find it very, very familiar when they come to it. It's like, I know this. This makes some sense. And it's also a good way to find commonalities, common ground. I mean, ADF, we're Pan-Indo-European, and our basic corridor of ritual is a Pan-Indo-European pattern. But you can also throw an awful lot of Proto-Indo-European in there. It fits really well. Mm-hmm. It provides a commonality where people from different cultures can practice the same rituals. So I've been doing that for 30 years now. Put out a book, and a number of my prayers in my other books are based on Proto-Indo-European deities, just because I'm going to be indulgent to myself and do that. And I'm continuing to do it. If on my website there originally were sections from my book Deep Ancestors, and as I do more research, I update it, add to it, expand it. Well, I'm kind of working on my own personal project. It's called the Director's Cut of Deep Ancestors, and I'm putting all the evidence that I didn't have room for in the published version and putting it in this. And that's never going to see the light of day either, because right now it's twice the length of the published version, and it's only going to grow bigger. But what you see on my website is the pieces of the Director's Cut. So there's a lot more information on there of the things I deal with on there. I don't put everything on the book there. Of course, I have to sell books, but of what's on there, there's more depth to it. So I'm just definitely continuing to study and research.
So have you ever done a Proto-Indo-European ADF ritual? And if so, what would that look like? Oh, yeah, we did it last Sunday. Cool. In our grove, we do our equinox rituals of Proto-Indo-European. The one that we did for it's for the equinox, obviously, it's very similar to the one that's in Deep Ancestors for the spring equinox, because it's based on that, and it's adapted to the ADF core ritual, and also to our basic grove corridor ritual, because we have our own traditions, of course. But it's pretty darn close to the one that's in the book. It's dedicated towards Chossos, who's the dawn goddess, and her name is one of the ones that's best attested. We're positive that was the name of a Proto-Indo-European dawn goddess. And the Dewos Sanu, which is also pretty, it's not as well reconstructed as Chossos, but pretty darn well. And those are the twin gods, like Castor and Pollux, you can think of them as. If you know Vedic stuff, the Ashvins, they're
connected with dawn and connected with the sun. So it's directed towards them. And we send out a couple members of the Grove. We do it on my deck, actually, because we have a lot of stuff in our Celtic seasonal thing about the inside versus outside, and we don't really make up nice to the outsiders, the land spirits, until Beltane, so we can't really do it in my backyard. Plus, there was a foot of snow, but we have it on my deck, which is halfway between inside and outside. So that's why we do it there. But anyway, so some of our Grove members leave the deck and stop at 3 different places along the way and pour out an offering of milk and honey mixed together, and invoke Chasos each time. Meanwhile, back on the deck, we're blowing horns and singing songs in between each of these prayers. And then finally, she reaches a point fairly far away from the deck, and there's a long pole with that's been painted white, and on the top of it, it has dozens of pink ribbons of various pinks coming down about 6 feet on each from the top, and that's all covered up. And she removes that and waves it back and forth. Dawn has returned out of the dark, and then she comes back up, and we ask the twins to help her again, and then we set up the pole on the deck and pour out an offering of meat to her, and then we have a sacrifice to the Dewosino, and that's a horse. For our sacrifices, we use animals in the shape, bread in the shape of, not bread, cake, red velvet cake in the shape of animals. I got that idea from Francesca at an ADF gathering. I'd been using pita bread, and if you use red velvet cake, it actually looks like meat, and that's kind of cool. So we sacrifice that, and we give some to the Dewosino and send the rest around. We all eat a piece of it. And then we have our, then we go, it's pretty much ADF after that. We have praise offerings, the waters of life, and then we wind down the ritual. It's a very fun ritual. It's very impressive, very pretty. The pole is really gorgeous, and I really like it a lot. So, we do two, and in the fall equinox, we do one dedicated to Kemya Mater, the Earth Mother. We offer her a piglet, actually. We have 2 piglets. One we share, one we give completely to her, and one we share with her. So that's our fall equinox one. We do Proto-Indo-European as well. We had when I formed the Grove with Jenny Hunt, or she formed it with me, whichever way you want to look at it.
Which grove is this?
Nemus Ogneus, Grove of the Living Flame, in Durham, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And a lot of groves have an ethnic focus. They're a Celtic grove or they're a Norse grove. And we decided that since the ADF was Pan-Indo-European, and since one of ADF's goals was to provide rituals for the pagan community in general, our ethnic tradition would be whoever shows up. So we operate with the Proto-Indo-European ones and the equinox. We do Anglo-Saxon on the solstices. We do Celtic, primarily Irish with a touch of Scottish on the 4 Celtic ones. And then we also do an American Independence Day one, because some of us are interested in American paganism. So we do the Proto-Indo-European ones, the 2 of them. Very
cool. I always wondered what a Proto-Indo-European ritual looked like.
There's plenty of material in Deep Ancestors and on my website for that. And if you go to our Grove website, we actually have some of our ritual scripts there. They're from a number of years back, but they're fairly close to what we do now. And it's nemosogneos.org. There's a link to it on my links. I have a page on my site for links, and it's one of the 2 at the top. There's a link to ADF and a link to Nemus Ogneos right at the top.
Yeah, I see here. nemosogneos.org?
Yep.
All right.
.com works too.
Okay.
We got them both. For some reason, nemosogneos.com and .org were still available. No one had grabbed those. We have our rituals there as well.
Wonderful, and I will make sure to link to that website as well. Then.
Yes, and while I'm plugging myself here as well as the Grove, I have a YouTube channel, which is just Ceisiwr Serith again, and there are a lot of ritual things on there as well. And one of them is a film of the Grove setting up our sacred space. So that's one of our Grove rituals we have on there. I'd like to put more on there someday, but it's a question of getting people to film it, and that'd be a little more difficult. But there is one of our Grove rituals on there.
Very neat. I think we should probably start wrapping it up here. We're over a half hour.
Yeah.
So let's talk real fast about. We've talked briefly about some of the books that you have out, but real fast, go ahead while you're plugging yourself. Let us know what books you have out there for us to buy and where we can pick them up.
Well, you still could run across Pagan Family from place to place, but you might as well just go to my site and get the more recent version of it. Book of Pagan Prayer and Pagan Ritual Prayer Book, the green book and the red book, although the red's kind of orangey looking. They're roughly the same sort of idea. The first one, the first half is more prayer theory, and in the second book, it's more hardcore. How do you actually write, poetic styles, things like that. And then in the second half of each of those books, there are just prayers, and so they're available pretty much everywhere. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get them through my site. You can get all my books through my site, and if you get them through my site, you'll get them autographed. Ooh. Deep Ancestors is my Proto-Indo-European book. That's available pretty much everywhere as well. And my other one is Back to the Beginnings, which is a new form of Wicca that's based on Indo-European ideas. I actually think it's some of my best ritual work I ever wrote. So I'm really very proud of that book. And that one you can get through either my website or lulu.com. It's a print-to-order company.
All right. And Deep Ancestors, out of curiosity, is that on our list of books for ADF?
I'm pretty sure it's on there for the Indo-European section and for the Proto-Indo-European section. It was published by ADF, so it probably is.
Okay. Is it there for the dedicant readings, do you know?
I honestly don't know. It might be in the, we have to do research one of the, a particular ethnic group. I think it might be there as the reading for the Proto-Indo-European one.
All right.
Really the only book out there like it. There are a few books, scholarly books, specifically on Proto-Indo-European, but in general, in order to study Proto-Indo-European, you just have to study all the different Indo-European groups. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty sure it is there.
All right. I'm pulling it up as we speak.
That was a fun book to write. That was obsessive. I consider myself not to be a particularly good writer, but to be a really good editor. When I start to write something, it's very academic, very complicated, very dry, and then I whip it into shape by going over it, sometimes a couple dozen times, and until it becomes very simple to read. People compliment me on how simple my writing is, and I just think, my God, if you could have seen the draft.
I had a very similar conversation with Kirk about the his reciprocity book.
Every professional writer I've ever read who has given advice on writing has said, edit. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a good writer. You just write it down. I can be writing something, and as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, this is crap, but I can fix it. Mm-hmm. So you just get it down, get the ideas down there, get the basic stuff down there, and then you go back and you fix it.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, I do see it here on the recommended reading list. It's actually the only book under the Proto-Indo-European culture list.
Yeah. Unfortunately, all the good ones on Proto-Indo-European culture are either out of print or really expensive, or both. Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead and check that out, and I bet it's a lot easier to read than In Search of Proto-Indo-European.
I actually wouldn't recommend that book anymore, because about half of it is about archaeology, and the archaeology's developed so much since then that it's a little obsolete.
I did notice that a little bit while I was through what I was able to get through.
Sections on culture are pretty good. They haven't changed that much. But the archaeology section it's good to get an overview, but you don't really rely too heavily on that.
Absolutely. Well,
although personally, I found that book very easy to read, but it tells you the sort of books I have to read.
Well, it's always good to listen to a fellow geek.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a geek. I'm not the science. Well, I do like science fiction, but I don't read very much of it. I'm not the techno geek sort of a thing. I'm the ancient crap geek.
Well, I'm sorry to rambling a little bit here, but I'm definitely I'm not a techno geek. I love my technology, but the gremlins don't like me to have the technology.
Yeah. I am very proud that I've been able to fix a lot of problems on my computer myself just by Googling. Because if your computer is doing something crazy, it's done it crazy to someone else too.
Yeah.
You just Google the problem, and you can find someone else who's had the problem and people who've helped them. And I can almost always fix anything on my computer, and I'm not a techno geek at all.
Mm-hmm.
You don't to keep your computer under control. You don't necessarily have to know too much about computers. Just know how to Google well.
Oh yes. So it's good advice for our listeners as well. So to wrap things up here, is there anything else that you would like to comment on, or any concluding thoughts from you?
Well, one of the things I really like about ADF is the reverence is probably too strong a word, but the respect for scholarship. And I just would like people to encourage people to learn how to do scholarship. Learn the good publishers, learn the good authors. It takes a while, and I couldn't sit here and list all the best ones for you. But it's like academic presses. Anything from an academic press is going to be good. Anything, if it's a primary source, the older the better. If it's a secondary source, the newer the better. That's sort of a good rule. But work at it. Read the good books. To tell you the truth, I don't read the kind of books I write because I have to spend so much of my time reading other books in order to be able to write the books I write. I don't have time to read those sorts of books. But read all the ancient things. There are a lot of really good sources out there. A lot of good ones on the internet. A lot of bad ones on the internet. But there are a lot of places with good primary sources. Again, I'm going to plug my website, CeisiwrSerith.com. There's a page there of suggested links, and it has links to a lot of really good. If you want Irish texts, any Celtic text, even Welsh and text, there are links on my website to some really good sources for those. There's one that's trying to put every single Celtic text on, and they've got a lot of them. So go to those sorts of sites, and there's a lot out there. You can try. I don't want to blow my horn too much, but you can trust the links that I have there. I've vetted them very carefully.
Wonderful. So, check that out. I'm taking a quick scroll through here myself. It looks like we've got some excellent links here. Though I will admit I got a little bit excited when I saw the Addams Family, and then a little bit disappointed when I realized it was a different Addams Family than what I originally thought. But
does the other Addams Family have 2 Ds in it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's my American section.
I have one final concluding question for you.
Okay.
Tell me about the pink poodle.
I was at a Celtic conference once, and I was just sitting there, and I don't know if it was in between papers or whether it was just a boring paper, but I just thought, just for giggles, I would write a prayer to a pink poodle, just for the heck of it, and so I did.
Wonderful.
Yep.
The prayers to the Great Pink Poodle are under the and the rest.
Do you get the and the rest, where that comes from?
No.
Gilligan's Island. The first season.
Oh.
The first season, the song did not end the Professor and Marianne. It ended and the rest.
I heard that trivia somewhere. I think I'm a little young to have. Yeah. I don't remember hearing that version of the song, but
I forget. What was the name of the guy who played Gilligan? Anyways, he said that if they didn't change that, he'd quit. He insisted that the other two be put in the song, or he'd quit, which was really nice of him.
Yes, yeah. Well, and before we go, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, again, go to my website. There's a contact me button on there.
All right. Well, then we've covered everything, and Lords, no, we haven't covered everything, but
yeah. Well, anyways, every single page on my website has links on the top of it to all the different other pages and a contact me. So any page you're on, you can click to contact me.
Excellent. We've covered all of my immediate questions. I get the feeling that we may be asking for you to come back on again sometime.
That'd be great. And anybody who wants to send me any questions, comments, brickbats, just contact me. I'm pretty good about responding. If you write to me and I don't respond for a while, take that as a compliment. It means I have to think about it. The easy ones I respond quickly, and then the ones I want to respond in more depth, they sort of sit there and I forget they're there, and then I find them and I have to apologize for having taken so long. So it's a good thing if I don't respond for a while.
Duly noted.
But we'll get a response.
All right. Well, thank you, David, so much for taking the time out of your evening to talk with us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me. It's fun. Go
ahead.
I like to talk, so this is good.
Excellent. I like to listen, so. All right. Well, have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
So fair, an isle so green, known by many names. Feel the pulse of the land, the blood boils within your veins. Someone go down to the holy well and raise the spirits there. Lay a feather on a stone with a flame and a lock of hair. The crane, the wolf, the bear and the boar no longer dwell upon these shores. You say the goddess and God have gone, but I tell you they live on, for in the cities and hills and in circles of stone, the voices of the old ways, the spirit of Albion is calling you home. Crashing sea to the moor and the highland glen, from the fairy hills home of the Shee to the veins of the Broad and the Fen. Someone go down to the holy trees of oak and ash and thorn, utter a charm in the verse of 3 till the summer king is born. The crane, the wolf, the bear and the boar no longer dwell upon these shores. You say the goddess and God have gone, but I tell you they live on, for in the cities and hills and in circles of stone, the voices of the old ways, the spirit of Albion is calling you home. Ride the white horses carved into the hills, walk to the hanging stones, bow to the might of Sir Nabbas's height, feel the peace in the ancestors' home. Someone go down to Wilmington where the giant guards the way. Step into the other world, into the womb where centuries pass like a day. The crane, the wolf, the bear and the boar no longer dwell upon these shores. You say the goddess and God have gone, but I tell you they live on, for in the cities and hills and in circles of stone, the voices of the old ways, the spirit of Albion is calling you home.
Hi, I'm Reverend William Ashton, and you're listening to Part the Mist, a Druid podcast created and hosted by the members of Columbia ADF.
Hi, I'm Melissa Hill, and I'm a Reverend in the Arnreacht Fane tradition. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience with ConVocation 2017. It's one of the largest indoor pagan conventions out there, and it draws people from all over the country. I know of people from California and from the East Coast who have taught there this year and in years past. So it's pretty exciting. I'm lucky enough that it's practically in my own backyard. It's about an hour away from my house. I've been going regularly for a while now, and I've been teaching and leading rituals for 4 years now. I'm really excited to say that ADF has upped its presence in the last few years. In the previous years, we've had offerings from the Archdruid Emeritus Emeriti. How does one pluralize that exactly? Anyway, Kirk Thomas, Fox Edelman, and Archdruid Emeritus Ian Corrigan have all taught at ConVocation in the past and this year. This year, Ian Corrigan gave us a number of offerings, the basics of ritual worship, witchcraft and tantra, and pagan evocation towards a pagan demonology. I didn't actually get a chance to go to any of those this year, which kind of bummed me out, but I had other things I had to do, and I'm lucky enough that I've gone to a number of his workshops at other festivals, ADF festivals, so I kind of felt like it was okay to skip. He always has a deep knowledge and understanding of everything he studies, and I heard really good things about everything he did. This year, I think it was just him and I who were ADF members who were giving offerings and teaching. This year, I taught a class, a ritual that was based on the work of Joanna Macy, an eco-Buddhist philosopher. On Thursday night at 10:30 at night, which was a weird time slot. I had never done a ritual so early in the event. It was surprising, though, that we got a really good turnout, even though that's a pretty slow night. So the idea of the Council of All Beings, which is the name of the ritual concept, the Council of All Beings is to give the spirits of the land a chance to speak by having humans channel their voices and to allow the humans to mourn the ecological losses that we have been experiencing. This ritual model was developed, like I said, by Joanna Macy and John Seed out of deep ecology, which is a philosophical movement. The interesting thing about it is that as a pagan priestess, I came to it from a totally different perspective than they did, and what they saw as something that they developed sort of uniquely, I saw as a reoccurring tradition of allowing spirits to speak through and harness the power of humans. Very similar to the drawing down the moon of Wiccan models, where the goddess comes into someone and that person speaks as the goddess. So what we did is we actually took that model and put it into an ADF framework, which felt very exciting to me. We had 4 people who were channeling the spirits of wetland, soil, trees, and coyote. And that just occurred dynamically and organically as I tried to find people who had the talent set that I needed to do that work. Originally, we did that work at Summerland along with Alina Jones, who was the person who pinged me about it in the first place. And I was really excited to help her get that off the ground. So Summerland last year was the first time we did it in conjunction with the Naturalists Guild. And it went super well. In that particular ritual, we had everyone channeling, and we didn't know what spirit was going to be channeled beforehand. It was much more off the cuff. And what we found out is that it's a super intense experience. And I knew that if I was going to present that at ConVocation or other large festivals, we needed to have a lot more control and safety nets set up. So I had the 4 channelers, but then I also had the 4 safety people. I had 4 people assigned to watch and mind the channelers to make sure that everything went well and everybody was safe and there were no problems. So I was really excited that we could use our knowledge of trance work and spirit work as modern pagans to kind of take this eco-philosopher's work to the next level. I think that as pagans, leveraging our skills for the earth is one of the things that we can give as a gift to the rest of humanity, because we have all this knowledge. We can be like, here it is. So I'm really hoping to do more work with the Council of All Beings. It sounds like there might be a Council of All Beings taking place at Summerland again this year, though I won't able to be there. I hope they do it. I also presented 2 other workshops, one called The Fire of Willpower. It's about how to build willpower, and it's focused on modern psychology and ancient lore. And that one was targeted towards adults. And then one on gatekeeper gods for kids. I always try to present at least one offering for kids to get exposed to ADF cosmology and gods. I think that's really important work that often gets denigrated because it's kind of a woman thing. It's kids, they're smelly, they're messy, they giggle, they don't sit and listen quietly. There's a lot of debate on whether we should raise our kids as pagans or not. I actually did a workshop on that a couple years ago. And I definitely come down on the side of, yeah, we should raise our kids as pagans if we can, if we want to. That it's a fine thing to do. So this year I did this workshop on gatekeepers, and the kids had a ton of fun making gates out of chairs and LED tea lights and whatever else, construction paper stuff. It was great seeing what they created. So those are the ADF workshops that got offered at ConVocation. But really, there's a lot more to ConVocation than just the workshops. A lot of it is the networking and the conversations that occur. And I got the chance to run into a number of ADF clergy, including the Reverend Michael J. Dangler at his vending booth, The Magical Druid. And I ran into Amber Farabee, Reverend Amber Farabee, and got to have a really great conversation with her about some of the stuff she's working on. She's working on a book. She's working on a a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm hoping she'll offer as a workshop at ConVocation next year, including this amazing thing about music that I'm having a hard time describing, but it's talking about how to practice deep listening with music. And I'm really excited about her book about OM. And then I got a chance to see and argue with Ian Corrigan. Arguing with Ian is always a fun thing to do. And he always enjoys it too, I think. Anybody who's willing to argue about theology and the organization of ADF, it's good for him. And so it's great to talk with people both in ADF and outside of ADF. Meeting new people is a super important part of what we do at ConVocation. The other thing we do is my Grove hosts a hospitality suite at Convo and has for a number of years. It's kind of lovely because the first time I went to Convo, I went to the ADF Hospitality Suite that was run by Shining Lakes Grove many years ago, the Grove that's out of Ann Arbor and has been there for absolutely forever. They used to run it. And then for a time it went defunct, and then we took up the torch and started hosting the ADF Hospitality Suite at ConVocation. And I'm really pleased that we can have that continuity with them. This year, Jen Hatter from our Grove spearheaded the organization of the suite. We also provide a cheap spot to sleep for ADF members and Grove members so that more people can make it and get the chance to experience ConVocation. We host a number of meet and greets. I got to go to both of those and got the chance to talk to a whole bunch of really interesting people about ADF Druidry. I talked with a Gardnerian witch about what we do and had a great conversation about Pacific Asian tattoo practices. All the while I was getting my hair braided like I was a Viking princess. Like the Girl Scout song says, I made new friends and kept the old. So Convo, it's a lot of fun. There's fellowship, there's random conversations in the hallways, there's chaotic dinners full of almost strangers. It's the people that make the convention amazing, the presenters, the participants, the staff, everybody who comes together. The thing about it that really sparks me is the fact that it's this community where we all feel like we're home. I had this opportunity to talk with a young woman at the end of the festival who shared with me how she had found her home and her place among all these people wearing their freak flags loud and proud. She was a really put together kind of lady, working on journalism. Clearly she was going places. And it was sort of surprising to me to see her feeling so emotionally connected to this place full of tie-dye and corsets and fedora hats. And it was beautiful for me to see her reacting to this sort of temporary city. It's like it's this fey realm that we all create together. This dream that we have that our lives could be this weird all the time. And I guess that's why I do it. Every year I feel this rising panic of organizing the rituals or planning the workshops or whatever it is I'm doing for ConVocation. There's this moment where I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And that's the reason why I'm doing it. Because of that community, because of those people who find their community there in ways that they never get the chance to do otherwise. It's this gypsy city that comes and it goes every year. And every year I get the chance to be a part of it and help create it, both for ADF and for my larger pagan community. And for that, I am truly grateful. So that's my review of Convo. Thank you for listening. And I hope that you think about going next year. Thanks so much.
Hello.
This is Kirk Thomas in From the Archives. And today's entry is from Oak Leaves, issue number 44 from spring 2009. And the title is Brigid and the Cailleach by Ferin Wolfsdaughter. A legend was once told of how the Cailleach kept a maiden named Brigid imprisoned in the high mountains of Ben Nevis. The Cailleach permitted the maiden to wander the high mountain passes as she had placed an enchantment upon the land that would prevent Brigid from ever escaping or meeting others who might rescue her. Day after day, Brigid would walk the paths, and even in the deepest depths of winter, her beautiful presence was felt. Everywhere she walked, signs of spring would appear. Through the bitter snow, the tiny snowdrop would thrust upwards and bloom for her. Each day she would pick a few flowers and bring them back to her prison, there to brighten her dinner table. The Cailleach had worked very hard to ensure that no one would know about Brigid, but one day her son followed her to the mountains of Ben Nevis and saw Brigid walking along a rocky path. Entranced by her beauty, he was unable to move or think until she wandered out of sight. Determined to learn who this fair maiden was, he ran to his mother's fortress to demand to be told Brigid's identity. The Cailleach refused to answer her son's questions and forbade him from ever approaching Ben Nevis or seeing Brigid again. But the Cailleach's son was stubborn. He devised a plan to return to the mountain fortress without his mother's knowledge. The Cailleach's son began his courtship of Brigid at the beginning of spring, and it continued deep into the winter. No matter how deep the snow or how fierce the winds, the Cailleach's son would make the journey to the high fortress. On the last night of winter, as the two warmed their hands by the fire, the Cailleach's son asked Brigid to run away with him. Brigid agreed, but then wept for the bitter truth of her situation. She wept because she knew she would never be able to find her way down from the mountains to the lands below. The Cailleach's son wept seeing his beloved's sorrow, and then his brow cleared as an idea occurred to him. He suggested that Brigid cover her eyes with her mantle so that she could not see the path in front of her. The Cailleach's son, who was not subject to the land's enchantment, led his beautiful bride-to-be down from the high passes of Ben Nevis into the lands below. Thus the enchantment of the Cailleach was defeated by love. The Cailleach learned of the escape and immediately set off to capture the pair. She chased them throughout the land, her wrath causing great winter storms wherever she went. Spring continued to follow on Brigid's heels, and the land rebelled against the storms thrown about by the Cailleach. One day, as the Cailleach rested against a large boulder, the land spirits had their revenge. As she sat, thinking about how to punish her son and return Brigid to her prison, her back began to change. The Cailleach was sinking into the stone. She tried to struggle, but the pull was too strong. She threw all her magical might against it, but the stone was unmoved. Just as the pull of the moon controls the tides, the Cailleach was absorbed into the boulder. With the Cailleach turned to stone, the young couple were free to marry and live happily ever after in the fair land of Ireland. And to this day, the snowdrop is the first flower to herald Brigid's passage through the land.
And we are back.
Well, that was a really fun interview conversation for me, and some good, really fascinating other segments as well.
Yes. So again, if you would maybe like to come and be on our show or talk about something, please let us know. And what's our email address again, Oren?
ptmpod@gmail.com.
All right. Do you have anything else to add, or should we just wrap everything up?
I have nothing else to add. I think we can go ahead and close out our episode. So if you're interested in checking us out, you can find us on iTunes, Part the Mist Podcast. Find us on Stitcher, same title. You can email us again, ptmpod@gmail.com. And you can find us on Facebook through our fan page or our discussion page.
Hey, Aaron, I forgot to mention there's a new podcast.
Oh, yes.
Yes, it is Kindling a Hearth Fire. Be sure to go ahead and check that out. It is like us, about ADF. And it is a great to listen to. So go ahead and check that one out as well.
I'm actually really excited. I haven't had a chance to give them a listen, so hopefully by the time our next podcast goes out, we'll be able to give you a little bit of a review.
Perfect. Maybe you could have her on the show too.
Yeah, I'd love to check that out.
Right, and that's all I got for right now.
All right. I that's it for me too. So until next time, listeners.